liberals are obviously going to be much more comfortable with transformation and change and novelty and creativity and all kinds of things, right? That I love, but not conservatives don't.
大家好，我是种树。Hi everyone. I'm very glad to have Laura Field here with me. Thank you to the editors at Princeton University Press for making this interview happen. Laura Field is a fellow at Brookings. She is a visiting scholar in residence at American University and a senior advisor for the Illiberalism Studies program at George Washington University. She holds a PhD in political theory from UT Austin and has held faculty positions at Rhodes College, Georgetown, American University. And she just published a book with Princeton University Press in 2025. This is why we're having her here with us to chat about the book. The title of the book is called Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'd like to just start by saying since mostly the people that are going to be viewing our interview, I hope will be Chinese intellectuals or educated Chinese people who are curious about America or following the politics of America closely. And I'd like to just, by way of starter, say that everybody here is talking about the book from the left and right. In a way, I am honored I look forward to having a long conversation with you here because everybody I know here on the East Coast and everywhere else in America are reading your books. I mean, even before the editors at Princeton invited me for this interview, I have in the podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis, I've heard you everywhere. I've heard you on Andrew Sullivan, on Francis Fukuyama, on with Jonah Goldberg. Your book is reviewed not only on I consider them sort of the center and the center right, and also on the left. I mean, I've read about book reviews of your book on the Jacobin, on the critical theory circles. So, by way of starters, to the Chinese audience that are watching this interview, I want to say that this is an important book that here in the West, or at least in America, so many people are talking about it. How do you understand the popularity and the reception of your book in the US since its publication just late in October 2025? Why do
Yeah.
you think has piqued so much interest in respectable circles? I mean, I know that,
Well, oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
I mean, thank you. I mean, yeah, it's been kind of wild to see the reception. I mean, it's hard to think of anyone who's ever benefited from just political reality as much as me with this book, right? Just the kind of, basically, I would say, I mean, to listeners, it's a book that chronicles the emergence of what I call the MAGA New Right, which is a group of intellectuals mainly. So it's one small slice of MAGA, right, of the Make America Great movement that I think helps us to understand that the shift between the first Trump administration and the second is the main thing that it does for people, right? I mean, just because there's been this dramatic takeover of the Republican Party, not complete, not perfect, and it's certainly not the case that this movement is, just one thing or simple. But there has been quite a major shift, right? Where there are new players that have sort of with a new ideology that has taken over the right and some of the major institutions. So the book is chronicling that, and I think, before the second administration started, people were thinking that this a second administration would be very much like the first, and it isn't, right? It hasn't been. I mean, it's been very dramatic for Americans, I'm sure across the country. And so I think that from the very first day, this second administration has been so active, so extreme in many respects, that people have started to see, oh, something's different here. And I think my book is part of the explanation for what has changed.
Mhm. Yeah, so the book is, you describe it as a study of intellectualized Trumpism. And even I think at times you write in the book, and I think that has also been the experience of people who are trying to describe an intellectualized aspect of the Trump movement, that sometimes you get dismissed. I think
Mm.
you wrote something along the lines of Trumpy intellectuals, that's an oxymoron. I think for the people who want to especially for the liberals who dislike the whole movement, they dismiss it and they don't tend to take it seriously. I mean, part of the answer seems to the reception of your book would be that you are taking them seriously, but you also
Right.
suggested in your answer just now that there is a difference between the 2016 Trump and the
Yeah.
2024 Trump. You've written this book between 2018 and 2024, if I'm not mistaken. So, what would you say is that difference between the
Mhm.
two Trump administrations, that made you want to focus on the intellectualized aspect of it?
Let me just say a couple things in response to just sort of I'll answer the question, but so let me just say a couple things because you are getting at some different sort of aspects of why the book is hitting a nerve. And I think um for one thing, I mean, there is a kind of oxymoron here because Trump himself is not really the guy leading this part of his own movement. For them, they really saw an opportunity with Trump. They saw that he represented something that they liked, and they liked the ideology, they liked some of the policy, but they also, and this was sort of a surprise in the research, they saw that he represented an older strain of conservatism, that he represented a kind of conservative populism that for decades has, and for almost a century, right, has been part of conservatism, but sort of on the fringes. And so they saw that he represented something intellectual. That doesn't mean he cares about that stuff in an intellectual way, and it doesn't mean that they've managed to persuade him of this. But they have sort of filled out the intellectual institutions of the right and managed to get a lot of power in the White House in the new administration. So I just think it's important to be clear. It's not that Trump has become intellectualized. That is a true, there is a real tension between that guy and the rest of the people I'm writing about. But their major success is really getting JD Vance in there, right? Because he really is sort of their type of person. He's almost their creation. And so I think that's an important sort of piece of this, or just like subtlety here. That I am not denying that Trump is kind of anti-intellectual, and he's his own sort of intuitive person. I think another thing that's important in just getting us started is, and maybe for your audience in particular, it's hard to overestimate how dismissive people in the United States and liberals and and in Europe and in Canada. I was raised in Canada. They're so dismissive of conservative intellectual life generally, and especially for good reason when it comes to Trump and Trumpism. I mean, you can kind of intuitively understand why there'd be some resistance to this, but I think ultimately it speaks to a real shallowness and a real kind of taking things for granted in the liberal mind, right? And this assumption that everybody thinks about the world the same way as they do. And there's a kind of blindness to some of the serious things that are going on the right, right, and some of the deeper things that this slice of the movement at least is tapping into, and Trump too is tapping into in the population. So I think the book is kind of trying to take these ideas seriously, which is sort of counterintuitive to a lot of people, and I think they're ready to hear some of that. Um, and so that's kind of, I think those, we've probably covered all the reasons now why it's kind of struck a nerve, but your question was about what's different um, between the first administration and the second administration, or was this last question more about what's new in the MAGA new right versus sort of older styles of conservatism? Do you want me to start? Is there one, or which would be a better thing to go at first?
Right, like both are interesting questions, but I'm
Yeah.
just struck by I listened to your interview with Andrew Sullivan, and even you suggested there that you yourself had a different view of Trump 2016 to
Hmm.
Trump 2024. There seems to
Hmm.
be, and you're absolutely right that in the second administration there it seems more organized.
Yeah.
There is Project
Yeah.
2025
Yeah.
going into it. There are all these different conscious forces. I mean, he's not just putting up a
Yeah.
cabinet sort of haphazardly. There is a
Yeah.
plan. So how
Yeah.
would you characterize the difference
Yeah.
between the
So,
two
I mean,
administrations?
I think they're just so much more effective now. And you've listed some of the things. I think of it in terms of, policy, personnel, institutions, and culture. And if we think about that, I mean, just on the policy level, I mean, so the book again tells the story of this takeover, and it was gradual in the first Trump administration. They were just sort of emerging as a movement, and I think of the movement generally as like networked clusters of different factions. We could talk about the Claremonters or the NatCons. There are all these different, and the Catholic post-liberals. So there are all these different groups, and they were just kind of getting their feet, coming together, doing some conferences and stuff, and getting organized. And then during the Biden administration, I honestly thought they would sort of exit the scene,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I read that in your book.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I just thought, January 6th, some of these people were caught up in some of that, in the legal argument side of it, and not the violence, but sort of the grounds for the violence and the arguments. And so I thought that I thought Trump would leave the scene. I thought this stuff would fizzle out, and some of the people were starting to support other politicians like DeSantis and so forth. But anyway, Trump obviously didn't. He had this staying power, and so did the intellectuals. And over the course, I really wrote the book between 2022 and 23. I had been writing about these guys,
Mm.
but during that period, it became very clear. They were consolidating power. They basically got their new president at the Heritage Foundation. They got a new president at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. And these are old school kind of conservative establishment, pillars of conservative DC life, right? And so they didn't take over all of them, but they took over some important ones, like and the National Conservative people started staffing a lot of these places when Trump got in. And then they got JD Vance, so the personnel thing. And then when they won the White House, these groups like the Heritage Foundation that organized that policy project, Project 2025, which was they've always got policy projects for any new incoming administration, right? But this was different. It was far more radical. It was far more sort of just the language, the setup was much more extreme. It's kind of like the new security strategy. There's a different kind of rhetoric around it, and the policies are more radical. But they had that in place, and they had these lists of staffers who they were ready to slot in to the new administration. And so, whereas in the first administration, there were a lot of people who were more, closer to the old GOP, who had been, civil servants or, who were kind of holding the line on some of the older ways of doing things and the more standard way of doing things. The new administration, that was all out the window. And you had Doge. So then they brought in Elon Musk and did some crazy things, but that was all sort of, they had started planning that. You can listen to podcasts with JD Vance going back to, I think, 2022, 2021, where he's talking already about these sort of retire all government employees and this stuff about, getting rid of, firing all these people, replacing the elites, all these pretty radical things from an American perspective, right?
Mhm.
Pretty new and radical. So that was all set up. And then I guess I haven't covered the culture side, which is there's just been a shift, right, in some of the cultural institutions. In the book I chronicle all these online influencer guys that I call the hard right, who have PhDs in political philosophy, but also happen to be, openly fascist or openly Christian nationalist or what have you. And so that's a pretty big departure. And I'm not saying there's some straightforward, trickle down from the elites at Harvard all the way to the manosphere, but there are these interconnections. And there is a kind of new, um, there are these people who are kind of on the fringes, but who have quite a bit of clout now, who I think have had a lot of influence in the young people on Capitol Hill, basically, and in the think tanks.
Right. I mean, so let's get into those people that you describe in the book. The bulk of the book, you've alluded to, it describes three distinct groups of yeah, new right conservatives, the Claremont people, the post-liberals, and the NatCon, National Conservatives. And
Hmm.
what's distinct about them? I mean, I imagine speaking to a center-right US audience, people, even if you're not super into those groups, you would have heard some of them already. But I
I mean,
imagine,
it's really interesting to think about how to frame this for different audiences. But I mean, let me just give a big, broad, general definition of kind of what's going on generally historically, and then I can go into the little groups, okay? Because I think that's probably easier. But
yeah.
I mean, basically, on the right, there's a traditional, I think anybody who's 30 years or younger or older, excuse me, will when they think about Republicans, they think of Reagan, fusionism, Bush, right? And it's a kind of policy platform that involves free trade, like capitalist economics, and social conservatism, and a kind of internationalism, which also clearly, um, tips often into adventurism abroad, right? So, but like liberal activity. I mean, not liberal internationalism all the way to like liberal
Yeah.
interventionism. Um, or imperialism. So you've got that's the kind of familiar structure of American conservatism. That's kind of the inheritance.
Hmm.
And the new right, the MAGA new right, pivots away from a lot of that. Michael Anton, who's one of these key figures in 2016, defined Trumpism as nationalist economics, so as opposed to free trade, nationalist economics, secure borders, and America first foreign policy. Now, in a way, that's not that different, but on the international stuff, it's pretty different, right? It's kind of like a close the borders down, almost isolationist, at least in theory. And then social conservatism is still a very important part of this. And so, in the broad sweep of American conservative history, a lot of those things are sort of radical or like considered old-fashioned, more radical paleo style of conservatism, which has always been there. And it's got, you've got these figures like Goldwater, Pat Buchanan, the Tea Party stuff. It's kind of been festering, and it's really kind of revived itself through Trump. Trump was the vehicle for that, and so that has come in and basically taken over, and it did battle with the old GOP, and now it's dominant. There's still a lot of infighting. There's a lot of tensions, but that's sort of the general sweep of things. Um, and so it's a turn towards a different kind of foreign policy and a different style of economics, and a doubling down on the old conservative sort of traditional values. So the different factions of the GOP, um, and I guess in a general way you could think of it, or I've defined it as that the MAGA new right stands against liberal internationalism, and for a kind of nativist um, populism at home. So, okay, but if we get into the factions, they sort
Hmm.
of stand for different flavors of conservatism, right? And
Hmm.
I talk about the Claremont Institute group, and these are a group of well, not young anymore. I mean, a group of conservatives on the West Coast who are not especially interested in policy. They've got a radical kind of culture warrior streak, or they've always been interested more in shaping culture than in policy, though they stand sort of opposed to the administrative state, right, and to the big, massive federal government. So that's a key thing they've always stood for, and they see their mission as restoring the principles of the American founding. So they really see themselves as standing for those original principles of the founding, and in their way of seeing things, the current situation in America, sort of starting in the 60s, probably around then, has become so untenable and so sort of detached from those original founding principles that they think now at this point a counter revolution is warranted. And for them, that's what Trump represents, is this effort to turn back the clock. They're very against pluralism. And so I think it's been sort of their view of the American founding has kind of been corrupted by a sort of nativism and homogenizing impulse. So the book kind of chronicles that, but that's the one group, the Claremont group, obsessed with the founding, counter-revolutionary, and against the administrative state. The clearest sort of um, contrast with the Claremonters is the post-liberal group, which is a group of conservative Catholics, quite traditionalist, conservative Catholic scholars who call themselves post-liberals, who are oriented towards the Catholic social good and what they call the common good. And so their idea is not so much to return things to a original founding America, it's much more to reorient the whole state apparatus towards new common good purposes and a more communitarian organizing principle grounded in, to various degrees, Catholic social teaching. And so they talk about the common good. They've got a radical critique of liberal democracy, right, as something that eats away at the cultural fabric that is based on a false individual anthropology. I'm sure we could talk for many hours about this because you're a political theorist too, right?
And it
Are
seems
you?
to you that the common good founding is not American necessarily. I mean, America was not
Yeah.
founded on Catholic common good
No, I
principles.
mean, he tried. Adrian Vermeule is a scholar that's doing the best. Like, he's making a sincere, well, I don't know that it's sincere, but it's a genuine effort to argue that the that we've forgotten this basically Catholic natural law foundation to the American founding, and that if we kind of squint hard enough, though he thinks it's just the truth, that there's this objectively true communitarian foundation underneath sort of the more liberal version of the Constitution. I think it's very slippery, and I think he's falsifying. I think he's rewriting that history. I don't think it's true. I think that you can see there's I think a historical case to be made that the founding was maybe not quite as liberal or truly liberal as others might tend to think, that it's more complicated, that there are these other principles that are part of the background of the English common law and the religious traditions. Like, of course, that's all there, and I've heard liberals make those arguments too, but he goes much further and argues for something quite radical, I think quite ahistorical. And so I think there's a little sneakiness there, honestly. I mean, I'm not sure it's totally honest when you think about the historical record. And even like Patrick Deneen, who's his comrade, really, in arms, right? These are part of the same post-liberal group. But Patrick Deneen is very upfront. Of course, America had a liberal founding. It's the most liberal founding, in history. And and he's sort of like, we need to change that regime. There's some tensions in there, um, but basically, these post-liberals are thinking something's gone. If it wasn't already wrong at the beginning, something has gone very wrong. And it's bad enough that we need to reorient the whole apparatus. There's some radical stuff in there, replace all the elites, change the regime, and sort of redirect things to a whole new way of thinking. And so that's a pretty dramatic thing. They're much more comfortable with a strong executive and much more comfortable with a big administrative state. It's just that you'd have to tweak it so that it's reoriented towards things that conservative principles, basically. And so Vermeule has written a whole constitutional, like a whole redesign of conservative jurisprudence that's meant to replace originalism, which I'm sure that's the dominant conservative way of understanding judicial, legal interpretation. So that's the second group, but they're very different from the Claremont group, right? But they are kind of in conversation and having these arguments. And then the third most important group is the National Conservative group, which is really the political organizing body for all of this. And they do have their own doctrine. It's just nationalism. It's capital N nationalism. It's a homogenizing um, effort. Yoram Hazony is the lead here, and he has organized these conferences since 2019 in the United States, also in Europe, all around the world. I think he's visited India. He's trying to build nationalism international and sort of these new alliances. And his idea is that for a place to really thrive, you need quite a homogenous culture. You need shared history, shared traditions, shared teachings, shared religion. And I mean, if that makes more and less sense in different places, but in the United States, it's quite a departure from, the last 50 years for sure. And going back to the founding. So, but that's the organizing principle. There is this kind of nationalizing, get rid of pluralism, or to the extent you can, embrace Christian nationalism if you can. And so that's the organizing body, again, bringing all these different factions together. And then there's the hard right, which I've kind of alluded to, which is the sort of nasty, fascist, and violent underbelly, where you get really gross rhetoric, some big clashes and tensions between these different people in those circles, but kind of just an interesting through line because there are people in the administration who seem to have some real familiarity with some of these characters and connections.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I want to get back to those groups in greater detail in a little bit, but just as a broad question, as a
Hmm.
Chinese who I was raised in a period of time when America, the kind of old Republican conservatism was at its at the height of that,
Hmm.
and the world. I mean, I agree with you that not only now the new right, but also the liberals look back at that period and say that America was doing a lot of um, imperialistic wars all over the world. I mean, those things are not without blame. On the other hand,
Yeah.
it also set itself as the beacon of liberty for a long time. So I mean
Yeah.
those two things go hand in hand. And I grew up in a China where Chinese liberals, the word for America was the beacon country, the beacon as in the
Wow.
beacon of liberty. So, and that
Yeah.
has gone into that word has become a sarcastic word as well in the past 10 years.
Amazing.
And I think that I mean I think the main task of your book in a way is to chronicle this movement, this new replacement of the Republican Party now that um I imagine I'm not mischaracterizing you when I say to you the people that you have described are not liberals. Like they attack the good old ideals of liberalism and they reject it openly. I mean, I think, would you say that um, now to understand America as a beacon of liberty, is a it in a way it's outdated. I mean, by looking at what
Mm,
these groups of new conservatives or new right are
mm,
up to. On the other hand, I mean, here's the tension that I do want to hear what you have to say. They are claiming, a lot of them, not all of them, but I mean, definitely not the hard right, but like a significant amount of these people in the new right that you characterize are claiming to be reviving what seems to them to be
mm,
true liberty. At least,
mm,
the Claremont people um that considers the American founding transcendental. They are saying the founders really founded the true, the most liberal republic there is.
yeah.
And also, I mean, maybe not Adrian Vermeule, but Patrick Deneen, like you said, he also wants to defend this kind of a kind of freedom that was not possible in the liberalism that he saw uh to be character dis it destroys true politics, or I don't know how you would see
Hmm.
that tension, and if your
Hmm.
book um I mean I guess another way to ask about the purpose of your book is that on the one hand you claim to chronicle this movement that a lot of people are overlooking or dismissing unjustly,
Hmm.
and so you take them seriously and you want to expose both the highs and lows, but mostly the lows of what they're up to. On the other hand, to the most straightforward thing to ask is, do you have a normative agenda? Are you kind of
Right, right, right.
calling them out for, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's totally fair question, and I think I'm pretty upfront about this because you're right. I do think, I mean, the agenda is A, to chronicle it, right? I mean, that's, I think it was important. I didn't know they'd win. I didn't know that they'd continue to have this power that they do, but I still thought it was important to kind of get it on the historical record, right? And there are other people doing this too, right? Journalists and so forth. But, I have a kind of angle because of my own history and political philosophy and kind of understanding some of the language in a way that most people here just don't, right? They're not at all familiar with much political philosophy to begin, let alone this kind of weird, the way that these guys talk, right? Um, but and I'd say second thing is I did also want to show, though I don't think it's sort of such an analytic exercise so much as a kind of writing exercise to show how it can be seductive, to show the depth of the arguments, even if I don't agree with the arguments, right? Which I don't. Most of these I don't agree. I mean, I agree with like a lot of the stuff they talk about, but not the way they're approaching it. But I did want to show why a person could be drawn to this, why, my critique of liberals is that they don't even know how to talk about the meaning of life, right? I might not agree with the conservatives about their assessment of what the meaning of life is and whether that should be imposed on everybody, but at least they're having the conversation, right? And it's like, and they're open to kind of some of these questions, whereas, in liberal academia, in liberal circles, it's almost a faux pas, right? To take things so seriously and earnestly and to like listen to podcasts about what you should be doing with yourself. It's just not really part of the culture, right? And there's good historical reasons for that. I'm very fascinated by all of that. But so I really wanted to thread through the book some signaling to say, this stuff, they're on to something. There's a lot here that you could like learn from or think about that you don't think about, dear liberal, right? But then I think the main thing I also wanted to do, if like, and I think I'm pretty honest about this, is I did want to expose it and shine a light on it, because part of what makes me really angry, right? Because we're all furious in America, right? I mean, we've all got some of this in us, but I'm angry because I think they're abusing some of this history, right? I think they're mischaracterizing these traditions. I think the Claremont School has some very good arguments, but ultimately I think they've betrayed Abraham Lincoln, and I love Abraham Lincoln. I love his legacy in this country. I love the Declaration of Independence, and I'm quite happy to have arguments about all kinds of things, whether there's been too much immigration, right? Whether there's been too much DEI, whether there's been I mean, there's all kinds, whether the economy's been failing working class Americans, right? Of course, these are big problems that America has not done very well to solve, and Trump has been very good at articulating and fear mongering. But I think a lot of what's going on here is a bit of a betrayal of some of these rich traditions, and let alone a betrayal of other traditions like, Martin Luther King or James Baldwin and other things that are part of the inheritance that I think Americans can learn from, and so yeah, I was trying to do all that. I mean, it's not written, yeah, so it's written for mainly, I was thinking, a liberal audience, to kind of bring them in and also like show them why it's fascinating and also scary. But I guess I have one more thing, okay? Because going back to your question about um how this sort of works in my thinking, I and how America works as a beacon
Yeah.
or
I
not.
mean, they're replacing. I mean, they're
Yeah.
you've described the replacement. On the other hand,
Hmm.
I think that group, I mean, in general,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
not interested in claiming that
I think
that
in
title.
general they're not, but you're right that some, like the Claremont people, I think they see themselves often as working within that tradition and as a beacon of, and that they're doing what needs to be done to actually preserve America, right? I think a lot of those people, some of them are grifters or dishonest or just in it for the power, but I think a lot of them think that they really have an understanding of how politics works and that this is the way to do it, and that these are necessary interventions to protect America. And I disagree with them, but I think that that's worth understanding. And so they would see themselves as sort of the true guardians, right, of something like the Lincolnian inheritance. I guess for all kinds of reasons I lay out in the book, I'm skeptical about that they're being right about that. But I also think what's happened is, because some of them are kind of so in their heads and so online and so catastrophizing about the state of the country, right? They're so hyperventilating. And, I really don't think they're right about just, I don't think the country's unraveling. I don't think we're at some huge crisis point. I mean, there's a plenty of stuff I did that's bad and going wrong, but that's kind of always true, right? And so, excuse me, and a lot of the changes that we've seen in the last 50 years, I think, are good. And so you kind of have this catastrophizing, I think, highly intellectualized diagnosis of the country that a lot of the people I write about are subject to or have persuaded themselves of. And I think it's quite deranged and detached from a lot of what's going on in America. And so, in terms of, and I do think of it in terms of a kind of elite cluster of people who have kind of got through a lot of chance events, have gained a hugely outsized amount of power and are sitting there with Donald Trump, helping him make some very bad decisions. And I don't think it's popular with the American people. in a lot of ways. I don't think it's popular even with a lot of MAGA voters. I think they're not as radicalized, they're not as extremist, and they're not as a liberal, right? As a lot of these guys are. So that's kind of how I think about the politics. I don't know that I'm right, but there are, I have seen evidence that the main, even, you know, your average MAGA voter is not as radicalized as these guys who have all this power. And so, and I guess I think my view is we see that in America. We see a lot of people standing up for liberty, right? And protesting in the streets and doing what they can. And so I'm hopeful that the beacon thing maybe not totally over.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about them because I mean, it's clear that you're not with them on their anti-liberal projects. And also, I mean, in a way, um, you are describing, like you said repeatedly, a bunch of PhDs who know a lot about difficult things, complicated topics, and they those are not the group of people that we usually see in politics. We think of them as nerds living in
Yeah.
their studios, reading books, and not, in the National Security Council advising the president. And
Yeah.
that's the group of people that you're describing, and I want to talk about them too. I mean, what's th what seems to me to be a interesting aspect of your book is that, like I said earlier, it's a mix of highs and lows, right? You
Mm.
repeatedly emphasize like these people know more than you think. They're not just insane bloggers on the internet. I mean, that's how liberal intellectuals dismiss them in the past because
Hmm.
they have weird pseudonyms. Um,
Hmm.
they make Roman references and honestly, a lot of the blog posts, I can't imagine the amount of work that I mean, reading those, some of the blog posts seems to be a very unpleasant
Yeah, I
way
mean,
to
I
spend your
dipped in and
time.
out. I mean, methodologically, I do not make any claims to have synthesized comprehensively any of that stuff, right? I knew who mattered from
Yeah.
paying attention, and then I dipped in and out because I couldn't sustain, a deep analysis of like Bronze Age perverts podcast. I just wouldn't have been able to do it personally.
I mean, I want to say that isn't there a difference between a professor at a respectable university who, is say has written a serious book about Homer to like an online like Bronze Age pervert. Your books, I mean, if I have to say a kind of injustice, my first reaction
Yeah,
to it is to group these people together and say
is
that,
injustice. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, but I don't think I did because I clearly classified them in different places, right? I'm not equating Bronze Age pervert to anyone else on that list. I mean, I think the chart maybe is a little misleading insofar, but I was trying to give a visual representation of what's actually in the book. But I think if you read the book, it's pretty clear that I, have a different level of respect for some of these different people. But the truth is, that guy got a PhD at Yale, right? He turned fascist after that, but his dissertation's full of some pretty crazy stuff. And I don't necessarily blame the people who who signed off on it. That's not what I was trying to do. I think that that's part of being in a free country. You're going to have some crazy PhDs that are passed, right? And so, but he did, he's got this PhD. He was very, very canny in turning and using the respectability and the prestige that comes with that, and transforming that into or not. It's not like it was just that he was using. He's very talented, and he's very fascist and radical and willing to use all kinds of crazy violent language and ideas that are pretty sophisticated, right? And I'm talking about Bronze Age pervert, right? He's willing
yeah.
to do all of that. um and then he trades in the prestige, and so I think that's a real thing people do. They use the Ivy Leagues here in this country. I mean, I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, right? You're in Boston. I mean, how much power that has in our culture. The right is right about that, right? There are these elite um institutions that have a huge amount of clout, and those guys, Patrick Deneen knows that. He's at the University of Notre Dame. Adrian Vermeule knows that. He's kind of untouchable because he's sitting there at Harvard, but he's arguing for Carl Schmitt and a kind of Catholic theocracy, right? So, and that's, I'm not saying he should lose his job. I'm saying it's totally fine for someone to, I think, like me, or I'll defend myself saying it's okay to come along and point that out, that he really, he's using that prestige in ways that, are pretty questionable, and we should take a close look at it.
I mean, you're in a way, when I am reading your book, I it seems to me you're also the chronicling. You're chronicling a new period of, like you said, how prestige functions and how intellectuals are supposed to work. Because that's like a lot of
Mm,
these intellectuals are not they're not doing the professorial things that you think of. Like publishing, like Adrian Vermeule, like you said, when he publishes academically, they're like boring, you know, what we think of as a typical administrative law professor,
mm,
that publishes books that I probably will never buy or read. But you also described that there is this online presence. I mean,
mhm.
like, let's grant that he is a very serious scholar, established in his field.
Absolutely. I mean, he is. He's
Um,
extremely impressive, and he's very, he's got this long pedigree. He's clearly very brilliant. I mean, these other books, the administrative state books, right? All of this executive power. He's I mean, he's clearly super impressive. And but then he's got this other life. And at least since 2016 or 2015 when he converted, he's got, but I think it goes back quite a bit further, a kind of authoritarian impulse in his thinking. And which is also like that's allowed. It's just that it should be, I'm happy to expose it too. I mean, so he's very brilliant, um and I think he is, but he's cushioned at Harvard.
right. And in your book, it's littered with the people that you call kind of bookish and online. Like and
Yeah,
both are
yeah, yeah,
true.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it seems to me that a lot of the people that you describe almost have a rupture in their
Hmm.
academic rigorosity, seriousness in their expertise in the field, and also this meme like. I mean, I wouldn't call Adrian Vermeule meme like, but it is like a
He's
online.
pretty funny online. He's got a big Twitter presence, or I don't follow it very closely, and a lot of them block me. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, you're right. There's something here. It's
Did they
hard
block
to.
you after the book? Is that
Oh,
or
they
have
blocked me before the book. I mean,
you
they,
oh.
yeah. I mean, many of them, not all of them. And I'm not
I mean,
on Twitter
if
very
that's
much, so
true,
it's
then
not, you know.
if that's true, then they're at least as sensitive as the snowflakes that they make fun of, because that's what the left
Yeah, yeah.
the left do to, they are
Well,
triggered.
it's either that or they're sort of, I mean, we could go into that maybe another time about what is going on with these guys, right? They're so protective of themselves, or I think they might know that they are engaged in a certain kind of, I don't want to call it a game, right? But they are political actors. I think that many of these guys really are politically active. They do have an agenda. They're not always perfectly open in their academic writings about this, but they're pretty open, in the scheme of things. And I wouldn't want to generalize. I mean, maybe you're right that it's opening a whole new mode of academic engagement, but I think, and there's some truth to that. Like it's kind of like all bets are off, right? Um, and I don't know the extent to which that's true across the spectrum. I don't really, I think we just don't know yet what's going on. I almost welcome a kind of much more direct and open style of engagement that's less pretending to be academic. I was trying to, in my book, do that where I didn't want to, I don't like the kind of view from nowhere objectivity. Um, I like to try to get, you want to get a synthetic understanding. I'm not against truth or anything like that, but I think that there's a kind of pretension, right? That's part of academic life that I'd be happy. I don't know. I'm just talking out loud here, but I'm
Yeah.
not totally against a kind of opening up of some of these confrontations.
I mean, this kind of attitude would suggest that, I mean, I think you would also agree with this. They position themselves in the beginning to, as conservatives do, as reactionaries. They have things that they want to criticize, like either the what's wrong with the university, what's wrong with higher ed, what's wrong with teaching Americans about being an American means. I mean, they have all these very clear reactionary stances taken by most of these. I mean, each one of the three schools that you bring up, they
Hmm.
start off as criticisms against status quo.
Hmm.
But your book, I mean, it seems to me that you are also suggesting that this is not just conservative. It's gone beyond, the kind of reactionary attempt to conserve um,
Right.
something, a good thing.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll phrase this in a two-part question. On the one hand, the new right ha fundamentally it almost feels like a rebellion against liberalism. I mean, which part of their criticism do you find to be serious and worthy of consideration? And on the other side, the second part of the question is, to what extent do you find this movement to be actually reactionary? I mean, in the first, you report on this as well. Their claim is that they are reacting to woke
Mm.
Marxist takeover of the university since the 60s. Um, but your characterization of them clearly suggests that they've gone beyond that. There's something more
Hmm.
than just
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
taking the university back from the evil woke Marxist and
Hmm.
actually giving them a good liberal education. If that's the case, I'm sure you'd be more sympathetic to what they're doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I think that's right. I think it's tempting to think maybe they're trying to overshoot the mark to then bring things back to a more moderate place, right? Maybe best case scenario, that's how they think of things, like that this is what's necessary to you go very far in a reactionary mode, the hope being that things could kind of settle down in some sort of compromise zone. And maybe that can happen, in the longer term future. But I think that the worrisome thing is that their arguments are not that, right? Their arguments are quite, if you think of Patrick Deneen, his when he describes what his ideal for liberal education, it's almost he kind of excludes the Enlightenment and the early moderns. He's kind of like they should get off the syllabus. And I don't think that's because he thinks that there's too much. I mean, partly he thinks there's too much of it, but I think he actually thinks they're dangerous and bad, And so that in his sort of, if he could control things, he would just have a much more traditional Catholic, ancient, biblical teaching that might have some classical texts from, but it would be quite censored, and let alone postmodernism and all the other stuff everybody's reading. So, I mean, I think that there is a quite radical attempt to do something quite a bit more radical and to really um, reshape things and impose a new kind of morality, a new old-fashioned world, right? Is how I think I mean, but there's a kind of a desire to impose those traditional value systems that is, I think, deeply illiberal and can help us understand the distinction between these conservatives and the old conservatives. Because, if we think about the old establishment, they were sort of liberal pluralists. They were personally conservative, and many, deep belief, Christian um, traditionalists, and really held on to that as their own, as not only valuable, and they were fighting for more space for that in public life, but they also were fighting for, religious liberty, and with the understanding being that there would still be space for people who disagreed, right? They might not like marriage equality, but they could kind of make their peace with it for other people, right? They would still allow that kind of basic liberal pluralism that seems to be protected by the First Amendment and so forth. I think the MAGA new right really rejects that kind of pluralism. They've done it very explicitly in many cases, and they really have spoken about just like retaking things and then imposing this old value structure that's pretty monolithic onto the country. So I think that's an important distinction. But I think that the thing that they're doing that's kind of interesting, or I mean, it's scary interesting, but I think is a real thing, is this they see that liberal democracy fails people, or has, at least the way it's evolved and been taken for granted, it kind of fails people on the level of meaning. And so conservatives are always arguing about how liberals just are floating off the fumes or like sustaining themselves off the fumes of the old religion and the older ways. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And liberals haven't yet figured out how to deliberately sustain and support and build community and to build meaning and to kind of foster those cultural inheritances so that they can be sustained. Um, Liberals are obviously going to be much more comfortable with transformation and change and novelty and creativity and all kinds of things, right? That I love, but not conservatives don't. Um, and so, but there's something there that they see clearly about liberalism, and they're coming in to fill the vacuum, and I think liberals really have a real problem there that they need to start thinking about.
Yeah, but yeah, great. But I'm wondering, on the one hand, both from the liberal perspective,
Hmm.
in the at the end of the book, you kind of say like what they don't offer a good um defense against that attack, which would
Oh,
suggest that that attack is partly right. I mean, I
yeah.
agree with you on the lack of meaning part. If if liberals can't supply that meaning for themselves, then they're kind of up for grabs. They're up for grabs from extremisms.
Yeah.
And also on the other hand, where do you draw the line between, I mean, I'm just asking this sort of generally, not
Hmm.
personal attack against you.
That's
But
okay. Yeah.
where does one draw the line between serious criticism and reflection on liberalism, which is a fact of life in America, and also these online figures, frankly, like we've mentioned before, they're quite distasteful and honestly kind of
Hmm.
disgusting in the
Hmm.
remarks that they make, especially against women. I mean,
Hmm.
they're drawing that line, making that difference between serious and unseriousness seems to be a
Hmm.
impossible task.
Right.
And it has to, I mean, this is
Well,
where
I
the
mean,
fact value
yeah.
distinction, you can't make that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think part of it in the book, it's like, um, I talk in the conclusion about well, I just want to make a small point. I talk in the conclusion. I have this section where I try to like restore the humanities and build these new centers, right? And I say we should invite these MAGA new right people to co-chair, right? These new departments or whatever that I've imagined. But I do say not all of them, right? Like you got to draw some lines. And I was not trying to. I had to write the book in a way that was trying not to launder some of this stuff, right? To just be direct. Like this stuff is pretty vicious and not it's perfectly fine for it to exist in a liberal society. That's just going to be how it is, right? You're always going to have extremists and um whatever, but that doesn't mean you install them in an institution of higher education, right? I mean, at a certain point, Bronze Age pervert goes off and becomes fascist. He's not welcome at Harvard anymore. Sorry. I mean, you draw the line. Um, and so that, of course, you have to think about where that line is drawn, how you do that, and there's a lot of way. I mean, we that can be done. That I think everybody can agree that there's some, and you can still sort of advocate for great accommodation of people who are, acting in good faith, who have strong disagreements for whatever reason, and still exclude someone like. Unless he makes some sort of reparations for himself, right? Maybe he could be forgiven, but as far as I'm concerned, you keep that out. And I guess I just say on the question about liberalism, and its failures and how it's been so bad at defending itself. And I mean, I agree with all that, but I also think liberals do live virtuously, right? They do have very good lives. There are a lot of them in this country, and there are a lot of like conservative liberals, right? There are a lot of people who live conservative lives but still believe in political liberalism. And so I think all of those things, it can be very disappointing. I think that there's a kind of project of the future for Democrats and for centrists and for Americans to just become more conversant in moral questions and in questions about the good life without necessarily becoming zealots for any particular piece of it, but just also to be sort of educated in these different traditions. Like, I think that's possible, but I also think part of what needs to happen is for people to just be able to articulate what it is they're up to in their lives, because liberalism can be, there's this great book, Liberalism as a Way of Life. I don't know if you've had that, maybe you should interview him, Alex Lefebvre, also Princeton. And it's like liberals do live very good lives, and it can be defended on moral ground too. But it's not
Mhm.
it's not easy, and liberals are terrible at it. So I think there's a lot there to work with. But you're right. I mean, nobody's very good at it.
Yeah, and if we look at the the movement of the new right that you chronicle as a phenomenon, taking a step back and ignoring their agencies,
Hmm.
there's a reason why that narrative is appealing today. I mean, there's a group of people
Hmm.
that describe liberalism as something that weakens the core of the
Hmm.
human being and destroys community. And like you
Hmm.
say, they sap meaning away from our lives.
Hmm.
If that's not true, then they would just be cuckoo voices. They wouldn't have gained,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have attracted, especially so many young men. Like I think your book, one interesting
Yeah.
aspect of it is you don't hide the fact that it's being written by a woman. It's being written by a mom, and
Hmm.
and the fact that they speak to young men who would do and say things now in real life. I mean, um
Yeah.
they've had
Pete
to come.
Hegseth, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
it helps you understand Pete Hegseth when you read, I think, the book.
Yeah.
Um,
And they've said personal insults against you. That's sort of on the first page of the book. Um so
yeah.
I mean I think on the one hand I agree with you that you know that's what the solutions that some of them are putting out are just horrible to and
Hmm.
BAP is a symptom more than he
Yeah.
is a phenomenon
Yeah.
and but the symptom doesn't really point to I mean I don't think at least I don't know from a liberal perspective how can liberals um provide a satisfactory answer to those symptoms.
Well, I mean, I think partly though, so much of it is so online. And so I mean, I think partly we have to be, I think a lot of liberals have their head in the sands about the crisis of masculinity, right? I mean, they sort of deny that it's real and they say, well, women are still so hard done by. And I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that men aren't struggling and that they don't have real problems that are obviously festering, right? And so, I think partly it's like just acknowledging the reality there that this is a massive problem, whether you like it or not, for women and men. And I think, but the other thing is to just not totally young men and young people generally, like I was pretty radical and crazy when I was young. I was attracted to all sorts of stuff. Who knows who I'd be listening to on the internet? And so I think, you know, there's some patience there, and it's important not to overestimate how many people are getting sucked into this stuff for life. It can be attractive, it's shiny, it's exciting, and I think it also wears out. And I think some of the stuff is kind of healthy for these, and some of the stuff exposes them to cultural, maybe some cultural um, things that we're missing. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson is the good example of this because he's not like Bronze Age pervert. He's a much healthier version of it, even if he's kind of lost his mind and seems to be possibly, you know, dangerous or crazy right now. I don't really know. I haven't paid that close attention to him, and he's not in the book. But like there's this clear appetite for cultural renewal, right? For
Mhm.
deep thinking. Those things are not naturally there. That doesn't mean those things are conservative or that conservatives have a monopoly on it. You can do all that stuff deeply. It's just that our institutions have failed to do any of that. And I think for real historical reasons, um, liberals have failed on those things. But I don't think that's because of liberalism. I mean, maybe that's where I push back on Atheel. Right? I think that I mean it is and it isn't. Doesn't mean it can't be renewed. It doesn't mean it can't. Those traditions can't be fostered. So I think, I mean, I don't think so many of the traditions that are deep and impressive and can attract young people have nothing to do with conservatism.
Yeah, and I guess I know you disagree. You would disagree with the people that you describe about this. Do you see this? Do you see this movement or the new right in general as, on the one hand, it is a symptom of liberalism's crisis, but do you see them ultimately as the beginning of a new political order? Because let me just preface
Mm.
this by being a little sharp again.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine. It's fun.
You admitted that you were wrong about this for the like once already. You thought that this movement was gonna disappear
Mm,
before the second administration. It
mm,
existed before the second administration of Trump.
mm,
And I guess you and I both didn't expect them to gain so much real political power once
mm,
Trump ascended into the office of presidency.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think now if I'm interviewing one of them, they would probably say that this is the new political order in America.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I would disagree with them. Um, but I would probably say in 2020, I would have said, or in 2020, what I would have said, it's probably over. That was kind of a blip, and hopefully we can right the ship. Now I'd say no. I wouldn't say they do not have control of this new political order. I mean, they're just too unpopular. They don't have what they need, I don't think. I would suspect, that they are do not have what they need. I think that the Democrat I mean, I don't want to prognosticate, but I don't think it's not very settled, it's not very stable. So I would say we've entered a new era, a new political dynamic. They do not have the order, but I don't think there's any going back. I don't think it's a blip. There's a new order that's emerging, a new dynamic that's emerging would be what I would say, because you can't say there's a new order because there's so much resistance to it. I mean, they did some crazy things in Minneapolis, and this like 10% of the city came out in protest, right? So that's real. That's real too. That's part of the new dynamic. So I think that there's some good work being done on illiberalism. I mean, I'm at this GW Institute of, Illiberalism Studies program, and um, the director there, Marlene Laruelle, is a wonderful scholar who's talking about illiberalism instead of populism, but she talks about it as this newly emergent kind of dynamic in liberal places that have been liberal, who now have to contend with this illiberalism that's kind of that it's constantly in a dance with. And I think that's how I'm thinking about it too now.
Mm,
Um,
I see. I, um, I guess just by way of kind of ending this conversation, we've already spoken for almost an hour. You criticized the new right, and at the end, we touched on this as well. You say that there are things to be learned from them, and I've noticed that you began a lot of your interviews with American intellectuals in this way. You say that you've been educated by them too. You grew up in those circles that kind of
mhm,
um, it marks your first rebellion. It's from personal experience rather than from just an outside observation from
mhm.
the groups of people that you describe in your book. Um, what if anything do you actually think that they got right? And also grow being trained and educated in that circle.
Mhm.
What I mean, what is there anything that you admire? And even though
Yeah.
you've spent a whole book kind of ranting about the unpleasant aspects of the new right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I agree with a lot of their assessments of American politics for the last 30 years, right? I mean, you can see where this has come from. The there's the end of communism, you have 9/11 some catastrophes for the United States and the Middle East and for the world. You have the financial crisis in 2011 that or 28 or whatever 2008 that was dealt with pretty badly and never fully. I think a lot of people resented that because it ruined a lot of lives, and there was never any real reckoning with some of that. So I mean, and not mu I don't think I think that I'm sympathetic to that critique, not just of the response to the financial crisis, but a lot of the sort of neoliberal economic policies um, that have, I think, maybe were important and good in a lot of ways, but have also done a lot of damage that nobody's really acknowledged. And so that matters. And I think for me personally, um, on the cultural plane, I mean, I'm not going to go after the left because I think, I mean, I do a little bit in the book, right? The patriot, I try to articulate, what's real here, and the sort of, I'm not a big anti-CRT person because I'm genuinely impressed by a lot of that scholarship, and I think it's important, and the history there matters. But there has been this kind of almost a total evacuation of the academy of normative thinking, right? And of thinking about and of great books and the humanities. And there's been, it's just been pathetic the how the country, yeah, I think there's been a real failure there in the academy. So, I mean, I think Alan Bloom was kind of right in a lot of ways. I also think he was exaggerated and wrong in a lot of ways, but my own education benefited tremendously from a different style of, liberal education that isn't very common, and I think should be much more common. It should be open-minded and pluralistic, but none of but it's not it's that isn't very common. And I think so that I definitely think they're
You're
right
talking
about.
about a Straussian education focused on reading great books.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say that's going to solve the future, but I think that and I certainly wouldn't want it to be Straussian. I mean, I'm sincere about that. I think that it would not have to be that, but it would be, I think, just an old-fashioned, the way Strauss understood liberal education as something that's for, liberating the mind and the spirit and maybe teaching you virtue. I would emphasize that. I would also emphasize history, like historical, there's so much great history being done, but there aren't any history jobs for people because they're not, administrators don't care that young people take history courses. And I think that's terrible. So, there's a lot to be done on the cultural plane, I think. And the new right, they understand that. Like they're talking my language. I think they are very reckless in a lot of ways, right? And my version of a good education would be different, but not totally different. And I don't hate some of the things that they're doing with these institutions, the civics institutions and so forth. I think there's a lot of potential there. I just think that they are really thoughtless about the rest of the academy. So.
I just want to push you a little bit. What would you think a good education entail? I mean, it seems like even in your book, you outline a lot of the problems with the kind of the canonical approach of the typical Straussian.
Mhm.
How would you think, what is a good education? According to if Laura
If I
Field
could
is now the
design.
president of Harvard University, how would you change the core curriculum? Or what is a good liberal education?
hmm Well, I would certainly do a couple years worth of great books, right? As good Straussian would conceive of it. And so say we do a couple, maybe a full year course every year for 4 years. And in the canonical books, you could move historically through it. But it would be kind of maybe, that would have to vary region by region, but some of it would involve comparative literature, right? It wouldn't just be limited to the 10 books I had to read for my political philosophy. I mean, I'm joking, it wasn't that bad, but I'd open it up a little bit, and maybe in Seattle they read a few more books, right? From China, right? I don't know. Like you mix it up, right? And in the South they read more James Baldwin. I don't know, right? But it wouldn't be a single formula. And you'd also have a full year every year in college if you're talking about just the people who want to do the humanities track. And I'm not saying this should be for everyone, but I think that a good college education in liberal arts you'd have some sciences for sure, right? And that would be forced. And you'd also have history. You'd have a lot of history, and you'd have maybe legal public law. Um, I wouldn't want to get super didactic about a specific program, but my own education has a lot of faults, and it was sort of ideas heavy and great books heavy. And I think there's a lot of, I think history is really important for people to just read a lot of history. So that's where I'd sort of start. I'd say I'd do like a general template. People could fill in the specifics. And then there'd be art education, right? Music, great music. Art, that's what I would want for people. Philosophy. I mean, I guess we're getting a little utopian, but that is, I think, the core of a good liberal education. I think it'd be something like St. John's, maybe would be a good way to go, but you could have it a little more updated, a little more and a lot, also include, more Black people and women in the on the syllabus. Like some of these places, they do great books, but they don't include some of these great writers from the last couple centuries. So,
Right. I mean, it seems like where you stand wouldn't be very far from, I'd say, like the young average student who the young Laura who in your teens became attracted to these teachers in the first place. But really, what the book seems to go after, seems to me to be going after is elite radicalization. It's
mhm,
like these kind of at the highest level with people that are that this tendency
mhm,
for very learned, very serious, highly educated thinkers to move toward a
mhm,
radical,
mhm,
anti-democratic, anti-liberal
mhm,
positions and
mhm,
the hold. I mean, it seems to be a kind of mixture of grievance and ambition together.
mhm.
operating that could, sometimes lead to truly unpleasant words and opinions being expressed mostly online and also
Yeah.
sometimes in real politics. And in your book, you kind of, I think your attitude is clear where you said there's something deeply disturbing to you for these students, serious students of political philosophy, to spend so much time in politics. Like that, they have, in a way, you can talk about Machiavelli and how to dress well on the one hand, and then the next day you're writing about like vote for Trump, or you are like on that plane that will crash into that will fly into the Twin Towers.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
there's something deeply disturbing to you to combine the theoretical, the highly theoretical, and the kind of combative the combative side of
Well,
politics.
I mean, probably temperamentally, yes. I'm not interested in doing that. I don't think I'm opposed to that in theory. I think, if you can do it well and be prudent, um, you know, then that's really that's amazing, right? And there have been a few statesmen who the Claremont people also love, right? Like, I mean, Lincoln's the go-to guy, but the founders were pretty good at some of this stuff, right? And they struggled. You could see that they struggled with some, you read about, Jefferson, he was so idealistic and kind of anti-slavery at some points in his life, and then he struggled and he kind of lost it, like these people are struggle. They're serious people. They struggle over big moral questions. I don't really see some of the people I'm writing about, some of them are, I think, and some of them have just become fanatics. And I mean, I'm writing about a historical moment, right? Of like a course of 8 years, and I'm trying to represent it honestly, but it's not to say that this doesn't happen all the time on the left, and that it's not been a long part, that's not a part of intellect. That's a problem with intellectualized life. People want to go after the Straussians for having all these nefarious effects on politics. And I don't see it that way, right? I see it as ideas actually are dangerous. They are seductive. They can change the world. And if you're not, careful, and if you're not a prudent person who's struggling deeply with the moral implications of what you're arguing for, it can be really, really bad. And so, but that's not the Straussians' fault. I mean, that's Plato's. Plato talks about this stuff too, right? I mean, these are questions that Strauss illuminated, so that's kind of how I see it. I do think you're right. It is a book about, intellectual radicalization and the dangers of that. Um, and I don't think there's much we can do like on a like human condition level to prevent that from happening. But I mean, and I don't flatter myself. I don't want to be sort of pulling the levers of power. I don't trust my judgment, Like the book is pretty political. I did like
Yeah.
that was already, a lot, but I'm glad I'm not the one arguing, to using Machiavelli to affect contemporary politics. I'm probably much more conservative in my temperament than some of
Mm.
the people I'm writing about, in terms of what I'm willing to do in politics. I don't think my book there's much in there that is like radical dangerous, you know,
I
but
mean, this book is a political intervention.
it is a
You,
political intervention. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, right? If they're right about the world, then, I took my risk.
but if I were to characterize this intervention, it would be your attempt to um, to defend liberalism against its critics and
Yeah.
by way of doing that, save liberalism from its own failures. Because the new right is a product of the failures of liberalism as
Yeah,
much
I
as,
mean, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a little grandiose, but sure.
yeah.